When enemies surrounded a castle, it wasn't just the walls they were trying to break. They wanted to starve everyone inside. But castles had tricks to survive. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always tasty, but somehow they made it work. And they held out longer than anyone expected. One of the first things they relied on was simple but powerful: food storage. Granaries were the unsung heroes of castle defense, massive storage rooms built specifically to house grains like barley, oats, and rye that could mean the difference between surrender and survival. These weren't just regular storerooms. Castle granaries were engineering marvels designed with one purpose: keeping food edible for absurdly long periods. Stone floors and walls prevented ground moisture from seeping in. High ceilings with tiny windows allowed for ventilation without letting in too much humidity. Some clever castle designers even elevated their granaries on stone pillars to keep rats from having all-you-can-eat buffets with the winter supplies. Speaking of rats, a single pair of rodents could produce up to 2,000 descendants in a single year, if left unchecked. Medieval castle defenders literally played the world's most high-stakes game of whack-a-rat to protect their food supplies. Castle cats weren't just cute pets. They were critical military assets. The grain stored in these fortress pantries were incredibly resilient. A properly maintained store of barley could last 3 years or more. Rye and wheat could go for 18 months before quality issues became serious. Oats were particularly valuable since they could feed both people and horses, though nobody was excited about eating porridge for the 100th day in a row while under siege. What's for dinner tonight? Oh, look, it's our old friend oatmeal again. Most large castles aim to store enough grain to feed everyone inside for at least a year. The granary at Dover Castle could hold enough grain to feed its garrison of 256 people for over 10 months. At the Tower of London, underground granaries held enough to supply 3,000 people for weeks. The real trick wasn't just having grain, it was keeping it dry. Castle stewards regularly rotated stocks, spreading grain out on sunny days to prevent moisture buildup. They also turned to clever preservation methods like parching, where grains were lightly toasted to extend shelf life. While these grain stores formed the foundation of survival, even the most well-stocked granary couldn't provide all the nutrition necessary during long sieges. The clever defenders had other preservation tricks up their chainmail sleeves to ensure nobody went hungry when enemies came knocking. Beyond the carefully stored grains, medieval castle defenders turned to salted meat and hard cheese as their protein powerhouses during long sieges. These preserved foods weren't just occasional treats. They were survival essentials that could last for months or even years without spoiling. Salt was medieval food preservation gold. Every autumn, castle staff would slaughter excess livestock that couldn't be fed through winter. The meat was quickly packed in wooden barrels filled with salt. Lots and lots of salt. This wasn't the light sprinkle we use on French fries today. We're talking about meat completely buried in salt crystals, drawing out moisture and creating an environment where bacteria simply couldn't survive. Pork was the preferred meat for salting. A single pig could provide up to 40 pounds of preserved meat, enough to supply protein for a small family for weeks during a siege. Beef was salted too, but used less frequently since cattle were more valuable alive for milk. Fish caught from castle moats or nearby rivers were also preserved this way, offering crucial variety to the diet. The smell inside a castle's meat storage room would have knocked you flat. Imagine opening your refrigerator after a 3-week vacation, but instead of running away screaming, medieval folks would say, dinner. Hard cheese served as the other siege superfood. Fresh cheese spoils quickly, but aged hard cheese could last for years. The longer it aged, the harder and more durable it became. Some medieval cheeses were so rock solid that soldiers would carry them as portable rations, scraping off bits with their knives whenever hunger struck. Talk about fast food that could also double as a weapon in emergencies. Records from Dover Castle show that during one 13th century siege preparation, they stored over 3,000 pounds of hard cheese. That's roughly the weight of a small car in dairy products. The cheese was typically made from cow, sheep, or goat milk, depending on what animals were available locally. Between bites of tough salted meat and teeth-challenging cheese, castle inhabitants probably spent half their siege time just chewing. No wonder medieval paintings rarely show people smiling. Their jaws were too tired from gnawing on what essentially amounted to edible leather and dairy rocks. While salted meat and hard cheese provided essential proteins for survival, medieval castle defenders knew that a balanced diet required more than just these preserved staples. When the cravings for something fresh became unbearable, they turned to other resources cleverly hidden within their stone fortifications. A few months ago, I had no idea what a health ring even was until my fiancée got me one, and I have to say, I'm shocked this isn't a widely known and used product. It tracks my stress levels, and what I found out is that some supplements made my stress score spike, while others actually helped bring it down. I adjusted a few things based on that, and honestly, I feel 10 years younger. My wife mainly uses it to track her menstrual cycles, and she is obsessed with her sleep quality score. I noticed they are currently running a limited 69% discount, but I don't know how long it will last. It's currently only $60, and it's clear. This one is the best bang for your buck, with other health rings priced around $350 with less functions. They managed to price it this low because they cut out the middleman like Amazon, Walmart, etc., who drive up the price and take a big margin, ending up with the customer paying 3 to 5 times more. If you are on TV, you can check it out yourself by pausing the video and scanning the QR code with your phone camera or clicking the first link in the description of this video. Kitchen gardens tucked away in courtyards and protected spaces were the secret weapon against scurvy and other deficiency diseases. These weren't sprawling farms. They were compact, efficient growing spaces that made every square foot count. The typical castle garden focused on hardy vegetables that could withstand harsh conditions and limited care. Onions and leeks topped the list of siege-worthy plants as they stored well and added crucial flavor to the bland diet of grain and salted meat. Garlic served double duty as both food and medicine, helping to fight infections when proper medical care wasn't available. Cabbage earned its place in castle gardens by surviving almost anything. Frost, drought, and neglect couldn't kill these tough leafy vegetables. Many castle gardens also included medicinal herbs. Mint helped settle upset stomachs that resulted from the less-than-ideal siege diet. Sage was believed to boost immunity, while thyme and rosemary could be used to preserve food or treat wounds. These herbs didn't take up much space, but made a world of difference for both health and morale. When enemies attacked, castle dwellers might have joked, "The army outside wants to kill us, but the garden inside keeps us alive." Medieval gardeners were surprisingly scientific in their approach, often using raised beds to extend the growing season. By elevating the soil, it warmed faster in spring and drained better during wet periods. Some castle gardens had south-facing stone walls that absorbed heat during the day and released it at night, a medieval greenhouse effect that protected tender plants from frost. Space constraints led to clever innovations. At Conwy Castle in Wales, gardeners grew plants in layers with climbing vines on walls, root vegetables below, and leafy greens in between. This three-dimensional approach maximized yields from minimal space. Research from ancient gardening manuals shows that a well-maintained medieval garden of just 20 square yards could produce enough vegetables to supplement 10 people's diets with crucial vitamins and minerals for months. Even the smallest castle with tiny courtyard spaces could grow enough fresh greens to ward off malnutrition. These gardens protected more than just physical health. After weeks of staring at enemy forces and eating dried foods, the sight of something green and growing was a feast for the eyes and soul. Though no garden could provide all the fresh food needed during long sieges, clever castle defenders had another preservation technique to stretch summer bounty throughout the year. Pickling stood as one of the medieval world's most brilliant food preservation techniques. When castle dwellers needed to make summer's harvest last through winter and beyond, they would grab their salt, vinegar, and spices and get to work preserving vegetables, fruits, and sometimes fish in special brine mixtures. The process was surprisingly straightforward. Vegetables were cleaned, sometimes blanched, and packed tightly into wooden barrels or ceramic crocks. A mixture of salt, water, vinegar, and spices was poured over them until they were completely submerged. The containers were then sealed with wax, cloth, or wooden lids to keep air out. Medieval pickles weren't just food, they were time travelers, bringing summer vegetables to winter dinner tables. And unlike modern refrigeration, pickles actually improved with age. Kind of like medieval jokes, but tastier. Cabbage fermented into sauerkraut, providing crucial vitamin C during winter months. Onions, carrots, turnips, and beets all found their way into pickling barrels, creating a colorful array of preserved vegetables that could last for months or even years. What made pickled foods so valuable during sieges? Their durability was legendary. Records from the siege of Kenilworth Castle in 1266 mention pickled cabbage still being consumed after nearly a year of being surrounded by enemy forces. At Dover Castle, an inventory from 1289 listed 78 barrels of various pickled vegetables, enough to provide vitamin C for hundreds of defenders for months. Security around these passages was tighter than a miser's purse. Only a handful of trusted individuals knew their exact locations. Many tunnels had multiple false turns, dead ends, and even booby traps to confuse enemy forces if the passages were discovered. Some castle tunnels featured narrow squeeze points where only one person could pass at a time, convenient spots for guards to stop any unwelcome visitors. Courageous merchants sometimes made small fortunes supplying besieged castles through these secret routes. Historical records mention payments of 10 times normal prices for basic goods delivered during sieges. The risk matched the reward, though. Getting caught by besieging forces usually meant a quick trip to the executioner. For defending forces, successfully sneaking supplies through tunnel networks felt like medieval cheating. "You're supposed to be starving in there," complained frustrated attackers, while defenders probably replied, "That's weird, we just had a lovely roast chicken dinner." When food shortages became severe, despite these secret supply lines, castle defenders had to rely on another surprising food resource. When siege warnings came, smart castle defenders rushed to bring livestock inside the walls. Chickens, pigs, goats, and sometimes even cows were herded into courtyards, cellars, and any available space. These animals aren't pets. They were walking, clucking, oinking food reserves that could provide fresh meat, milk, and eggs long after other supplies ran low. The inner bailey of a typical castle could quickly transform from a dignified courtyard into a noisy, smelly barnyard. Chickens might take over abandoned storerooms. Pigs could be kept in makeshift pens in the lower parts of the castle. Goats, being the escape artists they are, required especially secure enclosures, often in disused dungeons or cellars where they couldn't climb to freedom. Records from medieval sieges reveal impressive numbers of animals brought inside castle walls. During the 1224 siege of Bedford Castle, defenders had herded in over 50 pigs, 100 chickens, and a dozen milk cows before the attackers arrived. At Kenilworth Castle's famous siege of 1266, historical accounts mention barnyard sounds echoing off stone walls day and night as hundreds of animals shared the limited space with human defenders. Life with livestock inside castle walls came with serious downsides, mainly the overwhelming smell. Medieval nobles who normally enjoyed perfumed chambers suddenly found themselves living in what amounted to fancy stone barns. "The castle smells terrible," one lord reportedly complained during a siege, to which his steward replied, "Yes, but terrible smells are better than starvation." Practical challenges abounded. Feeding these animals during a siege required careful planning. Castle defenders often set aside dedicated grain reserves just for livestock. Chickens could survive on kitchen scraps, while pigs would eat practically anything. Goats and sheep could make do with hay stored in castle lofts, though they might also chew on tapestries if left unsupervised. Castle inhabitants developed clever systems to manage their indoor farms. Waste from animals was collected daily and either stored in dedicated pits or dried for use as fuel. Some castle designs included special drainage systems that could handle the increased waste. At Caernarfon Castle in Wales, archaeological evidence shows that defenders constructed temporary wooden platforms in the courtyard to keep animals elevated above their own waist. The close proximity to farm animals had unexpected benefits beyond just food. On particularly cold winter nights during sieges, some defenders would sleep near the larger animals to benefit from their body heat. Nothing says medieval comfort like using a cow as your personal space heater. When even animal feed ran low, desperate defenders would turn to unusual solutions. When castle defenders faced dwindling supplies, they redefined the very concept of food with each passing week. Nothing went to waste during desperate sieges. Stale bread that could crack teeth became treasured rations, first softened in whatever liquid was available, then transformed into a paste with herbs. Medieval cooking shows would have been very short. Today, we're making anything that doesn't run away from us. Bone broth became liquid gold during extended sieges. After the meat was gone, bones were crushed and boiled repeatedly until every last bit of nutrition was extracted. Some castles boiled the same bones up to 7 times, with each batch getting thinner. Is that soup or just dirty water? Both! And it's tonight's special. The longer a siege lasted, the more creative the castle cooks became. One medieval record mentions a castle chef who was awarded a silver coin for making 30 meals from 1 chicken. Talk about stretching ingredients. Castle kitchens developed bizarre siege recipes over time. Tree bark, particularly from elm and pine trees, could be ground into flour substitutes. The 1462 siege of Bamberg Castle saw defenders stripping interior wooden doors of their leather hinges to boil into soup. Tonight's special, door handle stew with a side of wall plaster crackers. Don't worry, the splinters are extra protein. Candle wax made from tallow animal fat could be melted down and used for cooking when oil ran out. Not exactly gourmet cuisine, but it added calories when they were desperately needed. Rats, usually the enemy of food stores, became food themselves when times got truly desperate. Medieval siege rats were essentially free-range organic meat, locally sourced, cage-free, and definitely not something you'd put on a restaurant menu. At least nobody complained about the castle's rat problem anymore. Children often earned extra food by becoming rat catchers, turning these pests into an important protein source. One castle record mentions paying a boy 2 extra bread pieces for catching 12 rats in a single day. Leather armor could be cut into strips, boiled until soft, and eaten. Old parchment documents were scraped clean and boiled into a protein-rich paste. This treaty tastes terrible. That's because it's a declaration of war. During the siege of Rochester Castle in 1215, defenders reportedly ate their shields. These shields used to protect us from arrows. Now they're protecting us from starvation. Talk about multitasking. Even shoes weren't safe. The leather could be boiled until soft enough to chew. Medieval castle defenders would have been horrified by modern food waste. Nothing edible, or even barely edible, escaped the cooking pot during a long siege. When even these desperate food sources began to run low, castle defenders had to implement increasingly strict rationing systems that would make modern dieters look like amateur food enthusiasts. Rationing became the ultimate survival strategy as sieges dragged on and food supplies dwindled. What began as 3 daily meals quickly shrank into 2, then often just 1 sad portion that barely filled a wooden bowl. Castle stewards developed detailed systems to track every morsel of food and ensure it lasted as long as humanly possible. The harsh reality of medieval siege rationing followed strict social rules. Lords and nobles ate first, receiving the largest portions and the best quality food available. Knights and men-at-arms came next, getting enough to maintain fighting strength. Servants, workers, and common folk received whatever remained. The good news is we're having meat today. The bad news is there's only enough for the Lord to smell it. These ration systems were tracked with remarkable precision. At Kenilworth Castle during its famous 15-month siege, records showed daily bread rations dropped from 16 ounces per person to just 4 ounces, barely enough to fill the palm of your hand. Castle cooks became masters of the medieval version of food stretching. A single salted fish might flavor soup for 20 people, with the actual fish served only to the Lord's table. Grains were ground extra fine and mixed with anything available to increase volume. Sawdust, ground acorns, even finely chopped straw in desperate times. How's the bread today? Crunchy. Either it's stale or there's actual wood in it. Maybe both. These impressive food strategies often determined who would claim victory when medieval warfare became a waiting game. No wonder castle builders paid as much attention to their pantries as they did to their walls. Both were equally crucial for survival.